"Do not tell me it was not my fault," said Gerard, Duke of Wennock, his back to the new governess and his face to the rain on the library window. "Everyone who comes to this house tells me that within a fortnight, and I have learned to despise them all for the kindness. I held the reins. I gave the order to drive on. My brother is dead, and I am alive, and there is no arrangement of words that will turn that into a thing I can forgive. So you may save your breath, Miss Ferrars. Better people than you have tried." John Ferrars, who had been in the house 3 days, and had not yet said a single word about his brother, set down the slate she had been carrying and looked at the broad rigid back of the man at the window. "I had not meant to tell you anything, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I came to ask which room you would have me use for the schooling, but since you raise it, I will say only this. I have buried people I loved, and I have never once found that being told how to feel did me the smallest good. I shall not do it to you. The blue parlour, perhaps. It has the better light." There was a silence. The rain round the glass. He had braced himself, she saw, for the soft assault of comfort, and she had simply declined to deliver it, and the bracing had left him off balance. "The blue parlour will do," he said at last, and did not turn around. She took her leave, but at the door she paused, not to console him, only to be honest. "I am sorry for your brother, Your Grace. I shall not mention him again unless you wish it. But I am sorry, and you should not have to pretend, on my account, that you are not." Then she was gone, and the Duke of Wennock stood a long while at the window, and could not for the life of him have said why his throat had tightened so. He had been a guilt-ridden man for 2 years. The house knew it. The servants moved quietly and spoke of the late master in whispers, as though grief were a sleeping thing that must not be woken. The Duke kept his brother's rooms shut and his brother's horse stabled and unridden, and he worked himself grey over the estate by day, and walked the long galleries by night, and he had grown so accustomed to the weight of his own blame that he had ceased to imagine living without it. It was, he sometimes thought, the only thing he had left of the boy he had failed, the faithful daily carrying of the fault. The governess had been engaged for his late brother's young ward, a small grave child who lived in the nursery wing, and whom the Duke could scarcely bear to look at, for the child had his brother's eyes. He had hired a procession of governesses and watched them flee, one after another, from the gloom of the house and the gloom of its master. He expected this one to flee like the rest. He half wished it. Her steadiness unsettled him more than any tears. She did not flee. Week by week, he became aware of her the way one becomes aware of a change in the weather. He would pass the blue parlour and hear her low voice reading, and once, unaccountably, the sound of the child laughing, a sound he had not heard in that house in 2 years, and which struck him like a blow. He would find, in the mornings, that someone had drawn back the curtains in the breakfast room he kept always dim. He would come upon her in the gardens with the small ward's hand in hers, naming the flowers, and the Duke would stop at a distance and watch and not know what he felt, only that it was large and unfamiliar and frightening. She never pressed him. That was the strange power of her. The others had come at his grief with soft hands and softer words, and he had locked the door of himself against every one of them. Joan Ferrars did not come at his grief at all. She simply lived steadily and warmly in the cold house, and left the door open and waited. It was the child who first led him through it. He had gone to the nursery one evening he did not often go and found the governess there, and the small ward asleep and a book open on her knee. She rose to leave him with the child as was proper, but the Duke said, awkwardly, "Stay. That is, the child sleeps better, I am told, when someone reads. I would not have you stop on my account." So she sat and read on, low and even, and the Duke stood in the doorway of his brother's child's room and listened, and at some point he found that he had come to sit in the chair by the cold hearth, and that the candle had burned low, and that he had not, for the length of a chapter, been thinking of the reins in his hands. When the reading was done, she closed the book softly. He has your brother's eyes, she said. It was the first time she had named him since the library. I have noticed you cannot look at him. May I tell you a thing, Your Grace, and you may dismiss it if you choose? Tell me, he said. His voice was rough. You think it a punishment to look at the child, she said gently, and so you have decided it is also a punishment the child must bear to be unlooked at, in his own home, by the only family left to him. But he does not know your guilt, Your Grace. He knows only that his uncle's face turns away. You are not sparing yourself by it. You are teaching a grieving child that he is hard to look upon, and he is the easiest thing in this house to love. The Duke sat very still. No one had said such a thing to him. They had told him it was not his fault, which he could not believe, and he had stopped his ears. This he could not stop his ears against, because it was not about him at all. I did not think, he said slowly, of how it looked to him. You have been thinking of one boy for 2 years, she said, without reproach. It is no wonder you had no thought to spare for the other. But there is a living one, Your Grace, in the next chair, and he is the nearest thing you have to your brother in this world, and every day you turn from him you lose a little more of what you are grieving to keep. The candle guttered. The Duke looked at the sleeping child. His brother's eyes closed in sleep, and for the first time in 2 years he made himself look, and go on looking, and the looking hurt the way the breaking of a long-set bone must hurt before it can knit true. Why do you not tell me it was not my fault? He asked her low. Everyone tells me. You never have. She was quiet a moment, choosing her words with the care he had come to know in her. Because I was not on the road that day, Your Grace, and I will not insult your grief by pretending to know what you carry. Perhaps you might have driven on slower, perhaps not. I do not know, and neither in truth do you. We none of us know the road not taken. But I will tell you what I do know. She leaned forward, and the candlelight caught her steady face. I know that your brother loved you. I know that no man who loved you would wish you to spend the rest of your life in the dark for his sake, and I know that forgiveness is not a thing you must earn or be granted. It is a thing you choose to give even to yourself, because the alternative is to let one terrible day go on killing people it has no more right to kill. The Duke of Wennock put his face in his hands. He had not wept in 2 years. He had thought the capacity burned out of him. But he wept now, silently in the chair by the cold hearth, while the child slept and the candle burned and the quiet woman beside him did not touch him and did not fill the silence with comfort, but only sat, steady and present, so that he should not have to grieve alone. When it had passed he was emptied and ashamed. Forgive me, he said. There is nothing to forgive, she said simply. That is rather the whole of what I have been trying to tell you. After that night something in the house began very slowly to change. The Duke went to the nursery in the evenings now and learned, haltingly, to be an uncle and not a wound. He had the curtains drawn back in his brother's old rooms and the windows open to the air. He could not yet bear to have the horse ridden, but he went one morning to the stable and stood with his hand on the old creature's neck a long while, and that was something. The servants noticed it before he did. The butler, who had served the family 40 years, remarked quietly to the housekeeper that the master had asked for the long gallery to be opened and aired, and that he had been heard of an evening to La Fonce, briefly at something the child had said, and that neither thing had occurred in the house since the accident. The whispering that had wrapped the place like a shroud began to lift. The maids sang again at their work, low at first, as though testing whether it was permitted, and then more freely, and the Duke, passing in the corridor, found that the sound did not wound him as it once would have, but eased something instead. He understood, dimly, that the governess had not only opened a door in him, she had opened the whole house, and the household had been waiting at the threshold of his grief for 2 years for someone to give them leave to live again. There came a morning, some weeks on, when he found he could do the thing he had thought he never would. He went to the stable, and he had the old horse saddled his brother's horse, that had stood unridden for 2 years, and he led it out into the cold, bright morning, and he rode. The first mile was agony. Every fall of the hooves was the sound of that other road, that other morning. But the governess had taught him a thing without ever saying it plainly, that the way through a grief is not around it. So he rode on, past the agony and out the far side of it, and somewhere in the second mile he found that he was weeping again, but that it was a different weeping than before, not the dry, locked anguish of guilt, but the clean grief of a man permitted at last to simply miss his brother. He came back to the house wrung out and strangely light, and the governess met him in the yard and took the reins and said nothing at all, and her saying nothing was the kindest thing anyone had done for him in 2 years. And he began, without quite admitting it to himself, to seek out the governess. He told himself it was to consult her about the child, but it was not only that, and he was too honest a man to keep the pretense long. It was that she had walked into the darkest house in 3 counties and refused to be afraid of it, or of him, or of his grief. It was that she had given him the one thing no one else had thought to give, not comfort but company in the cold, and then, gently, a hand to climb out by. It was that the house had grown warm around her, and he had grown warm, and he had not known until she came how long he had been freezing. He found her one autumn evening at the library window, the very window where she had first refused to tell him it was not his fault. The estate lay gold beyond the glass in the last of the light. She had a book in her hand, and the small ward had gone up to bed, and the great room that had been the place of his despair stood quiet and warm with candlelight. "I have a thing to say to you," said the Duke, "and I find I do not know how, for I am out of the habit of saying any true thing at all. So I will say it plainly, as you have always said things to me." He came and stood beside her at the window. "When you came, I was a dead man who had not noticed he had died. I had shut up every room of myself the way I had shut up my brother's rooms, and I meant to live so until the end, and you would not let me. You did not come at me with comfort. You came at me with the truth, and the truth was that I was teaching a child he was unlovable, and freezing a whole house for a guilt that no one I love would have wished upon me. You taught me to look at my brother's eyes again. You taught me to forgive myself not because I have earned it, but because you showed me that the not forgiving was its own cruelty, and not only to me." She had gone very still, the book hung forgotten in hand. "I do not know how a man thanks another soul for giving him back his own life," he went on lower. "I only know that I cannot imagine this house without you in it, and that the thought of you leaving it, of another family engaging you, of the blue parlour going quiet." He stopped. "I am asking you to stay, Joan, not as a governess, as my wife, as the woman who walked into the dark and was not afraid, and lit the candles, and waited until I could see by them. I had thought my heart broke on that road 2 years ago. You have shown me it only went into the dark with the rest of me. It is whole, and it is yours if you will have it." For a long moment she did not speak, and he felt the old cold begin to creep back at the edges of his hope. Then she set the book down on the sill very carefully, the way she did all things, and when she lifted her face to his there were tears standing in her steady eyes, and she was smiling. "I told myself I must not love you," she said. "A governess does not love the master of the house. It ends only in grief. But you were never the master of the house to me, Your Grace. You were a good man drowning who would not take the hand held out to him, and I could not stop holding it out, and somewhere in the holding I came to love you more than my own good sense. Yes, I will stay. I will be your wife. And I will spend the rest of my life seeing to it that you never again sit alone in the dark." He took her hands. They were warm as they had always been warm, and he drew the heavy gold signet ring from his own finger, the seal of Wennock, the seal his brother had once teased him for never taking off, and he held it a moment in the candlelight. "He would have liked you," the Duke said, and his voice did not break, and that, he thought, was its own small miracle. "My brother, he would have liked you very much. I think he sent you to me." I have stopped believing the worst of that road. I have begun, lately, to believe that it sent me, in the end, the one person who could lead me off it. Then we shall raise his ward together, said Joan, and tell him every day how his uncle loved him, and the eyes you could not look at will be the eyes you love best in the world. That is what grief is for, in the end, your grace, not to keep us in the dark, to teach us how to love the living. They were married quietly, as suited them, in the small church on the estate, with the late master's ward standing solemn and proud beside them. The Duke gave the signet into his wife's keeping with the wedding ring, for he said her judgment had proved sounder than his own, and the seal of Wennock could rest in no better hands. The house was never dark again. The curtains stayed open and the rooms stayed warm, and the Duke rode his brother's horse at last, with the boy up before him in the saddle, and if a shadow crossed his face on certain anniversaries, his wife had only to take his hand for it to pass. He kept, to the end of a long and gentle life, the habit of the evening reading. The grey heads of the Duke and Duchess of Wennock would bend together over a book in the candlelight, and any soul who passed the library window would have seen a man wholly at peace, and would never have guessed how far he had come to it, or that he owed every warm year of it to a quiet woman who had refused, on the first wet afternoon, to tell him a comfortable lie and had given him, instead, the harder and far kinder truth that he was allowed, at last, to forgive himself and to be loved.